Hey guys, in this tutorial I'm going to give you some tips for drawing a portrait using pastels. I'm Kirsty Rebecca and I make drawing and painting tutorials that are easy to follow even if you're just starting out. So I've started out with the outline and I've made sure to outline where the main highlights and shadow areas are to make it a bit easier to see. And I'm working on Clairefontaine pastel matte paper and I'll be working with the pan pastels and a variety of pastel pencil brands as well. I'm starting on the face with the base layer using pan pastels. And if you don't know what pan pastels are or how to use them, I have a link in the description to a video that explains them in depth. But basically they're just a soft pastel that's been compressed into a pan. And I'm applying the pastel using a soft tool, and that's the name of the brand, it's SOFFT. The base layer that I am blocking in now will just be a rough map of where the lights and the darks will go, and I'm not too worried about the colour at the moment because I'll tint areas with pastel pencils on top afterwards, but I do want the colour to be relatively accurate. So I start with the lightest areas, just using a neutral light grey with some beige and pinks mixed in with it, before moving on to some of the darker areas. And I try not to start with the lightest value or the darkest value straight away because it doesn't give me any wiggle room if I need to add lighter highlights or darker shadows later on. So I always start with a light colour other than white, and in the dark areas I'm mixing in some black and brown and dark red together so it's not just black. Then I'm starting on the mid-tone area and I'm first blocking in the areas around the highlights, which is more of a pink toned colour, and I'm adding in some of the darker, more orange and purple mid-tones. The base layer will look a little odd to start with because it's just blocking in the main sections, but once you blend out the colours and add more layers, it will become more cohesive. Although the pan pastels come in over 80 different colours, when you're doing a portrait with skin tones, you'll have to mix colours together to create the colour that you need. That's the best thing about working with pan pastels because you can mix your colours on a separate piece of paper, and I just use printer paper for that, and then mix the colour that I need before taking the soft tool and transferring it to my painting. You can also mix the colours straight onto the paper by layering colours on top of each other. If you've worked with the traditional soft pastel sticks before, you would have noticed that it's not really easy to mix colours, which is why you see pastel artists with so many sets and hundreds of colours because you basically need to have as many colours as you can to choose from. Whereas with pan pastels, you can start with your yellow, blue, red, white and black and then mix them like paints. The soft sponges come in all different shapes and sizes, so I'm using the smaller tools for the smaller areas, and sometimes using the tool on the side to get an even smaller mark. So I'm going in with the pastel pencils and I'm just starting with the highlight area, tinting it a bit lighter, and then I'm tinting the darker areas with different shades of browns and reds and purples and tans depending on what I see in my reference in that area. I'm starting on the eye area, adding in a mixture of black and a really dark indigo colour in the dark areas like the lash line and around the pupil. You want to make sure that you don't just use black for the dark areas. A lot of people say that you shouldn't use black in your artwork at all because it can make it look flat, and I do agree to a certain extent. I don't think that you should leave black areas straight black because it does look flat. But I use black in my work all the time. I just make sure that I don't leave it straight black. I mix in other colours like browns or blues to give it a bit more depth. When you're drawing eyes, try not to outline the eye. Instead, look at how the edge of the eye fades into the face using shading and shadows. This particular eye has a lot of makeup on, so it does look more defined, but if you're drawing someone without makeup, there definitely won't be a harsh line around the eyes. There's a lot of detail that people seem to forget about in the eye, like the waterline on the bottom eyelid and the pinker areas in the corners of the eye. The eye isn't just an oval shape with pointy ends, it slopes down in the corner where the nose is, and it isn't a perfectly symmetrical shape. Another thing that people seem to do is make the white area of the eye really white. If you import this reference photo into a program with an eyedropper tool, you'll actually see that the white of the eyes is quite a dark grey blue kind of colour, and nowhere close to white. A lot of people make that same mistake if there's teeth showing as well. It's actually really quite a dark colour because of the shadows. I've also really roughly blocked in the eyebrow area as well, and that was just to give me a bit more accurate values to compare the eyes against. The eyebrow will need more work, and I'll get back to those though. With your eyelashes, try not to put them in until you're completely done with the eye area, because if you decide you want to alter anything, you kind of have to work around the eyelashes. I got a bit excited and put them in too early, and I end up having to work in between them at a later stage. I'm blending out my pastel strokes either with a cotton tip or a blending stump, depending on the size of the area that I need to blend. And there is a few reasons why I blend out the pastel in between each layer. One of them is because I'm trying to create a smooth skin tone, so having each layer that I do blend smoothly means that it's less likely for any pastel stroke to show through at the end of the piece. The other reason is because your paper will have a limit to how many layers of pastel you can add. Using a sanded paper or pastel mat will help you add more layers than a generic pastel paper would. But by blending your pastel into the tooth of the paper as well, you're removing some of that excess pastel dust and pushing the pigment into the paper. This will allow some of that tooth to still be usable, which means that you'll be able to add more layers than you could if you didn't blend your pastel out. And if you don't know what tooth is, basically think of your paper as having some texture to it with little ridges like hills and valleys. When you lay down your pastel, it gets caught on the hills and eventually fills up the valleys. If you fill up your valleys with pastel, then it will be a smooth surface that your pastel won't have anything to grip to anymore, and you won't be able to add those additional layers. So by blending out your pastel, you're pushing it into the valleys or the tooth of the paper, allowing the hills to still grab more pastel. Moving on to the lips, she's wearing lipstick in the reference, so the lips are quite a bright orangey red colour, but if you're drawing someone without makeup on, the lips will be a very similar colour to the skin tone, just slightly darker. There's also no harsh line around the lips without makeup, the skin just fades into the edge of the lips. In this particular case, there is a bit more of a harsh line because she's wearing lipstick, but it's still a soft transition, which I'll be adding a bit later. With skin tones, you really want to make sure that you're looking for all the subtle colour variations in your reference photo. You may think that the face is evenly lit, so there's going to be darker areas in shadow and lighter areas in highlight, but there's a lot more to it than that. Some areas like under the eyes are going to be a bit more purpley grey colour, whereas the cheeks have a bit more of a pink tone to it. You really want to pay attention to those subtle differences that will make your portraits look more realistic and interesting. I'm using a few different brands of pastel pencils like the Faber-Castell Pitt pastels, the Stabilo Carbothello, the Derwent pastels and the Caran d'Ache pastels. And you don't need to have all of the brands, but each brand has slightly different colours, so it's easier to find a closer colour match when you have multiple brands. You can just easily layer light layers on top of each other to tint and mix the colours that you need instead though. Even with all of my sets, I don't have the perfect colours, so if I need a purplish brown, for example, I'll layer purple and brown to get the colour that I need. And the skin is just a layering process. I'm tinting the colours slightly and then blending it out and then continuing to tint different areas depending on what I see in the reference photo. She has a few freckles as well, so I'm using an olive brown kind of colour and I'm lightly pressing dots onto the skin. And I'm making sure that I'm varying how big the dots are. I'm turning my pencil so that the marks look like different shapes, and I'm paying attention to whereabouts the freckles are on the photo. They obviously don't have to be exactly the same, but you want to pay attention to where there are the most freckles. In this case, she has a lot of freckles on her nose and then spreading onto her cheeks. Then there are a few scattered ones on her forehead and chin area. I'm also going in with more of an orangey brown colour and varying some of the freckle colours to make it look a little bit more natural. The neck area is the same process as the face. I'm just making sure that the shadows are dark enough and the light areas are light enough. And then going on to the background, I'm starting this before doing the hair so that it will be easier for me to overlap the hair detail onto the background. Whereas if I went in with the hair first, I'll have to do the background right up to the edge of the hair and it may look like I've cut and pasted her onto the background. Doing it this way around means that I can overlap my background into the outline of the hair and then add details of the hair on top of the background. And I'm using pan pastels for this as well. I'm creating slightly darker edges and corners and making the center area a little bit lighter. And the reason for that is it helps bring the viewer's eye into the center of the painting. If your background was all one flat color, the viewer's eye can tend to drift off the artwork, whereas having darker edges really draws the attention into the center where the focal point is, which in this case is the eyes. And before I start on the hair, if you want to follow along with my longer real-time tutorials where I talk you through every step of the process, then head over and check out my Patreon channel. For as little as $4 per month, you will have access to every tutorial that I've previously uploaded in a variety of mediums like pastel, colored pencil, graphite, watercolor, and more. You will also have access to the original reference photo, a traceable outline, and a list of supplies that I'm using, so you really can follow along every step of the way. My tutorials don't skip any stages or cut out any important parts of the process, and I will share all of my secrets to help you improve. Every month, I will upload brand new tutorials to the library so that you can grow and develop your drawing and painting skills and take your art to the next level. The link is in the description if you want to check it out. Moving on to the hair, make sure you add in the skin where the part is. A mistake that a lot of people make is having the two sides of the hair meet exactly in the center, but in real life the hair comes out of the part line and you can clearly see some of the scalp through it. I'm blocking in the base layer with pan pastels again, using a lot of reds, browns and ochres. I also forgot about the ear when I was doing the face, so I'm just blocking that in now as well before I continue on with the hair. Hair is one of those things that a lot of people struggle with as well. The main mistake that I see people make is that they try and get in every strand of hair. Try and think about the hair as clumps and clusters rather than individual strands. In this case, she's got some soft waves in her hair. So I'm looking at one section of the hair at a time and I'm blocking in where the highlight of that clump is and where the shadow areas are. Then I'm blending out those strokes so the light and the dark areas blend nice and smoothly into each other. I'm adding in some of those wispy hairs onto the background here, which will make it look a little bit more realistic in the end, because there's always going to be those flyaway hairs that don't sit perfectly smooth with the clumps of hair. Then I'm using the white to bring out some of the hair texture in the lighter areas, and although I'm using white, I'll be blending it out so the white will mix in with some of the colours underneath, and also the strokes that I'm putting in will be much softer and won't look as wiry. When doing highlights in hair, you don't just want to use white in most cases. I started out with the white, but I'm going to be glazing other colours over the top like ochres and light oranges and browns to make it look more natural. If you just used white and left it like that, it can make the person look older than they are because it looks like they have white or grey hair. So you can always use white to lighten up an area, but I would go over the top of that with other colours as well. And that's the same for the black areas. You can start with your black to get your values established, but you want to come through with those darker browns and reds to stop the black looking so flat. You'll see me blending out the hair with my fingers quite a bit in between layers, and the reason that I'm not using a cotton tip or blending stump is because they're too small. They tend to blend the colours quite smoothly together, which is great for some areas like the skin. But I want some of that texture of my pencil strokes to show through on the hair, so I'm using my finger to really lightly blend out some of the graininess, but leave some of the texture there. I've done a handful of portraits in graphite or charcoal in the past, and a good tip that I used to make sure that the drawing looked accurate to my photo was to take a photo of my work and then compare it side by side with my reference on the computer. And you can use that same concept for this as well. I would actually recommend turning the reference and your artwork to black and white because it takes that distraction of color away, and then you can more clearly see if there's any glaring mistakes like the shape of your eyes or nose and mouth, or if you need to tweak anything that looks a little bit distorted, or if your darks are dark enough and your lights are light enough. All of that will show really well if it's in black and white. I also zoom in on my reference and the artwork on one area like the eye, and then really compare each section of my artwork to see if there are any differences. This is super helpful if you're drawing a commissioned portrait or you're drawing a famous person, because it really does need to be as accurate as possible so it looks like the person that you're trying to draw. This playlist is full of pastel tutorials that I think you might find useful, so click on that and I'll see you over there.